At the station, the evening sun slanted through high windows, spilling warm light across rows of weary travelers. Dust clung to the glass, and the hum of conversation blended with the scratch of suitcase wheels on the concrete floor. Wade Callahan shifted his weight against the wall, his boots leaving faint scuffs. He wasn't there for a bus, not really. He came for the stillness, for a chance to watch life move around him while he remained a shadow. That's when his eyes caught the old man, shoulders sagging under a burden heavier than his small satchel. The man placed coins, nickels and dimes mostly, on the counter. Each clink seemed louder than the last, echoing in the silence that formed around him. The clerk, tired from repeating the same line all day, sighed. "Sir, this won't cover it. You're short." The old man's fingers shook as he counted again, voice trembling. "It must be enough. My daughter's a broken bar there waiting." Around them, no one paused. Life rushed on, uncaring. But Wade lingered. Something in the plea struck deeper than pity. It carried the weight of love. Wade wasn't one to speak out of turn, but this wasn't something he could walk past. He stepped forward, his boots tapping against the floor, catching the attention of both the old man and the clerk. "Add it to mine," Wade said simply, pulling a few folded bills from his worn wallet. The gesture was as natural to him as tipping his hat in greeting. He wasn't looking for thanks, just the quiet satisfaction of knowing a man could go where he needed to be. The clerk shrugged, took the money, and printed the ticket. The old man turned, eyes wet with gratitude. His lips parted, but words stalled, caught in the lump of emotion that rose in his throat. Finally, he managed a whisper. "Son, you don't know what this means to me." Wade tipped his hat in reply, offering a small smile. "Don't think much of it," he muttered. To Wade, helping was second nature, something his father had drilled into him. A man's worth wasn't measured by what he held but by what he gave. Still, as the old man clutched his ticket, Wade felt something stir. He watched the man shuffle to a bench nearby, shoulders lifting as relief washed over him. Wade leaned back against the pillar once more. Content he had done right, but the thought gnawed at him. What kind of reunion waited in Dallas? The mention of daughters lingered in his mind. Wade had no family left, and maybe that was why the plea had pierced so deeply. He pictured two young women, anxiously watching a clock, hoping their father would arrive. And though he didn't yet know it, his kindness had set the stage for a meeting that would alter his wandering course. The bus terminal carried on in its usual rhythm. Announcements crackled through dusty speakers, suitcases thumped across the floor, and the smell of coffee drifted from the corner stand. But Wade's thoughts drifted elsewhere. He remembered his father's words, spoken often when they fixed fences together. "If you've got enough to help, then help. Someday, you'll be the one in need." Wade had never forgotten those lessons, though life had tested him plenty. Since the ranch sold, he'd been drifting like a tumbleweed, untethered. Yet moments like this grounded him. Even the smallest act felt like finding solid earth beneath his boots. The old man caught his gaze again and nodded, as though silently thanking him once more. Wade offered a polite tip of his hat, then turned to watch the bustle of travelers filing past. His mind was already preparing to move on. He rarely stayed in one place long, but just as he began to shift, as if ready to leave the terminal behind, the faint squeal of bus brakes echoed outside. The next wave of passengers stepped in through the sliding doors, dust rising with their entrance. Among them, two figures would soon change the course of Wade's quiet, wandering life. The station doors opened wide, letting in a gust of warm air and the scent of asphalt. Two women entered, their presence commanding attention without effort. They moved with a mix of grace and urgency, eyes scanning the room until they landed on the old man. "Daddy!" one of them called, her voice breaking with joy. The old man's face lit up, a smile erasing years of weariness. He pushed himself up, arms outstretched. The embrace that followed was tender, filled with the kind of love that made strangers pause and remember their own bonds. Wade found himself watching, unable to look away. The daughters clung to their father, whispering words only he could hear. Relief softened their features as though a heavy burden had been lifted. Wade felt a strange tug at his heart, watching the scene unfold. He had no family waiting for him, no daughters to call out his name, but in that moment, he shared in their joy. The old man gestured toward Wade, pride swelling in his voice. "Girls, meet Wade. He's the reason I made it here." Their eyes turned toward him, bright and filled with gratitude. Wade shifted under their gaze, unused to such attention. One daughter, her hair catching the late sun, stepped forward with a smile. "Thank you, sir. You don't know what you've done for us." Her voice carried warmth, sincerity that stirred something inside Wade. He tipped his hat again, his usual shield against emotions too strong to name. "Just seemed the right thing to do," he replied. The second daughter nodded, her eyes glistening. "Not many like you left," she said softly. Wade felt the weight of their words, heavier than he expected. It wasn't praise he sought, but the acknowledgment struck a chord deep within his quiet, lonely spirit. As the old man reunited with his daughters, the station faded around them. Wade stood a step apart, but his presence was undeniable. Something had shifted, as though fate had nudged them all into the same space, at the same time, for a reason beyond coincidence. Wade didn't yet know if this encounter would tether him to a new path or simply pass like so many moments before. But for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel like a drifter. He felt seen, and though he had only bought a ticket, it seemed destiny had purchased something far greater. Minutes later, the bus door swung wide, letting in a gust of warm evening air and the low rumble of the engine outside. Two young women stepped into the station, their presence drawing every pair of eyes in the room. They carried themselves with quiet grace, their movements unhurried yet filled with purpose. Wade noticed how their eyes immediately lit up as they scanned the crowd. Then, in unison, both cried out, "Daddy!" The word rang with joy and relief. The old man straightened, surprise and happiness transforming his tired face as his daughters rushed toward him. The reunion was tender and immediate. The women threw their arms around their father, clinging as though they'd feared he might never arrive. Tears glistened in their eyes, and the old man's rough, work-worn hands rested gently on their backs. Wade stood apart, silently observing, a small smile tugging at his lips. He'd seen reunions before, but there was something in this one, something raw, genuine, that made the noise of the station fade for him, leaving only their laughter and whispered words of relief. As the embrace softened, the old man gestured proudly toward Wade. His voice carried over the din of travelers shuffling about. "Girls, meet Wade. He's the reason I made it here." Both daughters turned, their gazes falling on the tall cowboy leaning against the pillar. Their expressions shifted, warmth flooding into their eyes. One of them stepped closer, her smile radiant, carrying both gratitude and curiosity. "You're a true gentleman, sir," she said softly. "Not many like you left." Wade tipped his hat, trying to appear at ease, though a flicker of discomfort crossed his face at the praise. Wade wasn't used to being in the spotlight. Most of his life, he'd lived in the quiet shadows of ranch life, where a man's deeds weren't praised, only expected. To him, paying for the ticket was as natural as breathing. Yet, as the daughter's eyes lingered on him, he felt the weight of something unfamiliar: attention, admiration, and perhaps even the beginning of a connection. He cleared his throat gently, his voice calm and steady. "Just did what seemed right," he replied, his words simple, his heart beating a touch faster than he cared to admit. The second daughter stepped forward then, her features striking in the golden glow of the fading sun. Her gaze met Wade's, and for a moment, silence stretched between them. "If you hadn't been here," she said, her tone sincere, "we might not have seen our father today. We owe you more than thanks." Wade shifted his weight, boots scuffing the floor, and offered a small smile. "Don't owe me a thing," he answered. "Family's worth every mile a man's gotta travel." The words slipped out before he thought them through, but as he said them, he felt the truth in his bones. The old man beamed, his chest swelling with pride. "See, girls, good folks are still out there." His voice cracked with emotion, and he clutched the ticket Wade had bought as though it were proof of hope in the world. The daughters stood tall beside him, their hands resting on his shoulders, grounding him. Wade felt his gaze drawn to them again. He didn't mean to stare, but there was something magnetic about their presence, something that pulled him in despite the distance he usually kept from strangers. He tipped his hat once more, hoping to break the intensity of the moment. Around them, the bus station resumed its noisy rhythm. Announcements echoed from the speakers, children whined for snacks, and travelers shuffled by with hurried steps. Yet, for Wade, everything else seemed blurred at the edges. as though the world had narrowed to just the three figures standing in front of him. The warmth in their eyes unsettled him, yet it also sparked a feeling he hadn't carried in years: connection, belonging. It was rare for Wade to feel tethered to any moment, but here he was, standing in a dusty station, realizing that fate had spun a thread between their lives. The first daughter, her hair catching the golden strands of light, tilted her head curiously. "Do you live here in Amarillo?" she asked, her voice both casual and searching. Wade hesitated before answering. "Passin' through," he said, truth ringing in his tone. "Don't stay anywhere too long these days." There was no shame in his words, though a touch of melancholy lingered. The daughter nodded, as though she understood more than he'd admitted. "Sometimes life doesn't let us stay in one place," she murmured, her eyes softening. Wade felt her words echo in his chest, striking deeper than expected. The old man chuckled, breaking the heaviness of the moment. "Well, wherever you're headed, Wade, you'll always be welcome with us. My girls owe you their smiles tonight." His laughter was genuine, though tinged with gratitude. Wade gave a modest nod, tipping his hat again. He didn't often find himself invited into the lives of others, yet something about this familiar, fragile yet strong, made him pause before walking away. Still, a voice inside reminded him he was a drifter, a man without roots, and roots were what bound people together. The daughter's eyes lingered on him, though, silently asking him not to disappear just yet. The moment stretched, filled with unspoken words. The daughter stood close to their father, but their attention continued to drift toward Wade, as if drawn by an invisible pull. Wade shifted again, unsure of what to say. He wasn't a man of many words, actions were his language. Yet tonight, silence wasn't enough. "Take care of him," Wade finally said, his voice steady, his eyes locking on theirs. "Men like him are worth their weight in gold." The daughters smiled, their expressions touched by the simple sincerity of his words. Wade didn't know it yet, but his presence had already etched itself into their hearts. As the station lights flickered on overhead, the warmth of the setting sun faded into the coolness of evening. Wade knew the time was coming when he'd have to turn and leave, to follow the open road as he always did, yet something inside him resisted. For the first time in a long while, he wanted to linger. The old man's gratitude, the daughter's kind smiles, the simple feeling of belonging, it all pressed against the walls he'd built around himself. Wade inhaled slowly, his chest rising as he let the moment settle into him. Perhaps fate wasn't done with him yet. He tipped his hat one final time, the motion slow and deliberate. "Safe travels," he said, his voice carrying the weight of both farewell and something more unspoken. The daughters exchanged a glance, then looked back at him, their eyes holding a question he couldn't yet answer. The old man clutched his ticket tightly, his smile unwavering. Wade turned slightly, as though ready to walk away, but paused. For the first time in years, the road ahead didn't look clear. It looked uncertain, and strangely enough, that uncertainty felt like hope.